By recognizing Jerusalem and moving our embassy there, our country is saying what we know from history and the Bible, that Jerusalem has actually been the capital of Jerusalem for 3,000, or capital of Israel for 3,000 years. And here's why that is so significant. That historical truth that Jerusalem has been the capital for 3,000 years absolutely explodes the myth that comes from the left that somehow the Jewish people just came into that land 70 years ago and they took it away from the Palestinians, and that the Jews have no rightful claim to it. The Bible says, and history confirms, that God gave that land to the Jewish people, and I believe, as Genesis 12 says, God blesses those countries that bless Israel, and he curses those countries that curse Israel. I believe President Trump and the United States are not only on the right side of history in this decision, they're on the right side of God.
And here it is, the Balfour Declaration. What do you feel when you see it here?
I genuinely feel it's one of the most extraordinary moments in the history of the Jewish people. If you think it took 3,000 years to get to this, and then you say, how did this miracle happen? It's the most incredible piece of opportunism. I mean, if you think you had an impoverished would-be scientist, Chaim Weizmann, who somehow gets to England, meets a few people, including members of my family, seduces them. He has such great charm and conviction. He gets to Balfour, and he unbelievably persuades Balfour and Lloyd George, the Prime Minister, and most of the ministers, that this idea of the national home for Jews should be allowed to take place. I mean, it's so unlikely. You come back to the big point, which is that this is perhaps the greatest event in Jewish life for thousands of years. And it's a miracle that it took place.
And he gathered them together into a place called in the Hebrew tongue Armageddon. And the seventh angel poured out his vial into the air. And there came a great voice out of the temple of heaven from the throne, saying, It is done. And there were voices, and thunders, and lightnings. And there was a great earthquake, such as was not since men were upon the earth, so mighty an earthquake, and so great. And the great city was divided into 3 parts, and the cities of the nations fell. And great Babylon came in remembrance before God, to give unto her the cup of the wine of the fierceness of his wrath. And every island fled away, and the mountains were not found. Revelations chapter 16, verses 16 through 20. And this is the beginning of the first full reading of the book Exploding the Israel Deception by Steve Wohlberg. We'll start today in chapter 1, Wrestling with an Angel. Have you ever heard of a wrestling match between a human being and an angel? As far as we know, it has happened only once in history. The details of this ancient story, which is recorded in Genesis chapter 32, will soon take on explosive significance in our study of Israel and Bible prophecy. Abraham lived about 4,000 years ago from our time, where we are today in the 21st century. He eventually had a son named Isaac. Then Isaac had a son named Jacob. It was Jacob who wrestled with the angel. As a result of that wrestling match, the angel changed Jacob's name to Israel. In order to understand why this strange encounter took place and its deep meaning for us today, we must first study some history about Isaac, Rebekah, Esau, and Jacob as recorded in Genesis chapter 27. And this is why I prepared, first and for all, a reading of the complete chapter 27 of Genesis. And after that, we go into a special paper that I made of a Bible commentary by Matthew Henry on this complete chapter. That's about 22 pages in the PDF. So it's going to take a while, and we probably won't even finish that today. But I think it is expedient for us to understand the real history of Israel. And I mean the complete history of Israel. Because if we don't, if we miss something in the understanding in the beginning already, how can we ever understand the Israel of the 21st century, of the 20th century, the nation state of Israel that was built in 1948? How can we ever understand any motivation, even by man, to build this if we don't have a complete and good and biblical understanding of why Israel is there in the world anyway? Yeah? Very, very important. So I'm going to read to you from Genesis chapter 27, from the King James Version, of course. And I'm not doing any comments. I'm just reading it, and I want you to pay attention, and I want you to understand it, and if you have problem with anything, pause, rewind, listen again. Yeah? Let's do this as a Bible study, especially with the Matthew Henry comment that comes later on, that we will go into a little bit after this reading. It is absolutely important that we understand Genesis chapter 27 and also Genesis chapter 32. We are going to read both, and both with the commentaries. But now we are going into Genesis chapter 27. As I say, I will not comment, but it is important that we understand the chapter, that we read the chapter, and when we then go into the commentary by Matthew Henry and his explanation and my explanation that I added to it, then it is also interesting for you to put this chapter of the Bible next to you from the King James Bible, so that whenever there is a reference to a verse, that you can follow that and that you will have immediately a full biblical understanding, because that's what it's all about. This is really a serious job. And as I said in the first video, in the countdown video, take off the church's glasses. Put on the biblical glasses of the Bible, the only undefiled Bible that we have today in the English language, the 1611 King James Version. From that Bible, Genesis chapter 27. And it came to pass that when Isaac was old and his eyes were dim, so that he could not see, he called Esau, his eldest son, and said unto him, My son. And he said unto him, Behold, here am I. And he said, Behold now, I am old, I know not the day of my death. Now therefore take, I pray thee, thy weapons, thy quiver and thy bow, and go out to the field, and take me some venison, and make me a savory meat, such as I love, and bring it to me, that I may eat, that my soul may bless thee before I die. And Rebekah heard when Isaac spake to Esau his son. And Esau went back into the field to hunt for venison, and to bring it. And Rebekah spake unto Jacob her son, saying, Behold, I heard thy father speak unto Esau thy brother, saying, Bring me venison, and make me savory meat, that I may eat, and bless thee before the Lord before my death. Now therefore, my son, obey my voice according to that which I command thee. Go now to the flock, and fetch me from thence 2 good kits of the goats, and I will make them savory meat for thy father, such as he loveth. And thou shalt bring it to thy father, that he may eat, and that he may bless thee before his death. And Jacob said to Rebekah his mother, Behold, Esau my brother is a hairy man, and I am a smooth man. My father peradventure will feel me, and I shall seem to him as a deceiver, and I shall bring a curse upon me, and not a blessing. And his mother said unto him, Upon me be thy curse, son. Only obey my voice, and go Fetch me them. And he went, and fetched, and brought them to his mother. And his mother made savory meat, such as his father loved. And Rebekah took goodly raiment of her eldest son Esau, which were with her in the house, and put them upon Jacob, her younger son. And she put up the skins of the kids of the goats upon his hands, and upon the smooth of his neck. And she gave the savory meat and the bread which she had prepared into the hand of her son Jacob. And he came unto his father, and said, My father. And he said, Here am I. Who art thou, my son? And Jacob said unto his father, I am Esau, thy firstborn. I have done according as thou badest me. Arise, I pray thee, sit and eat of my venison, that thy soul may bless me. And Isaac said unto his son, How is it that thou hast found it so quickly, my son? And he said, Because the Lord thy God brought it to me. And Isaac said unto Jacob, Come near, I pray thee, that I may feel thee, my son, whether thou be my very son Esau or not. And Jacob went near unto Isaac his father, and he felt him, and said, The voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau. And he discerned him not, because his hands were hairy, as his brother Esau's hands. So he blessed him. And he said, Art thou my very son Esau? And he said, I am. And he said, Bring it near to me, and I will eat of my son's venison, that my soul may bless thee. And he brought it near to him, and he did eat. And he brought him wine, and he drank. And his father Isaac said unto him, Come near now, and kiss me, my son. And he came near, and kissed him. And he smelt the smell of his raiment, and blessed him, and said, See, the smell of my son is as the smell of a field which the Lord hath blessed. Therefore God give thee of the dew of heaven, and the fatness of the earth, and plenty of corn and wine. Let people serve thee, and nations bow down to thee. Be Lord over thy brethren, and let thy mother's son bow down to thee. Cursed be every one that curseth thee, and blessed be he that blesseth thee. And it came to pass, as soon as Isaac had made an end of blessing Jacob, and Jacob was yet scarce gone out from the presence of Isaac his father, that Esau his brother came in from his hunting. And he also made a savory meat, and brought it unto his father, and said unto his father, Let my father arise, and eat of his son's venison, that thy soul may bless me. And Isaac his father said unto him, Who art thou? And he said, I am thy son, thy firstborn Esau. And Isaac trembled very exceedingly, and said, Who? Where is he that hath taken venison and brought it me, and I have eaten of all before thou camest, and have blessed him? Yea, and he shall be blessed. And when Esau heard the words of his father, he cried with a great and exceeding bitter cry, and said unto his father, Bless me, even me also, O my father. And he said, Thy brother came with subtlety, and hath taken away thy blessing. And he said, Is not he rightly named Jacob? For he hath supplanted me these 2 times. He took away my birthright, and behold, now he hath taken away my blessing. And he said, Hast thou not reserved a blessing for me? And Isaac answered and said unto Esau, Behold, I have made him thy lord, and all his brethren have I given to him for servants, and with corn and wine have I sustained him. And what shall I do now unto thee, my son? And Esau said unto his father, Hast thou but one blessing, my father? Bless me, even me also, O my father. And Esau lifted up his voice and wept. And Isaac his father answered and said unto him, Behold, thy dwelling shall be the fatness of the earth, and of the dew of heaven from above. And by thy sword shalt thou live, and shalt serve thy brother, And it shall come to pass, when thou shalt have the dominion, that thou shalt break his yoke from off thy neck. And Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing wherewith his father blessed him. And Esau said in his heart, The days of mourning for my father are at hand. Then will I slay my brother Jacob. And these words of Esau, her elder son, were told to Rebekah. And she sent and called Jacob her younger son, and said unto him, Behold, thy brother Esau, as touching thee, doth comfort himself, purposing to kill thee. Now therefore, my son, obey my voice, and arise, flee thou to Laban my brother to Haran, and tarry with him a few days, until thy brother's fury turn away. Until thy brother's anger turn away from thee, and he forgot that which thou hast done unto him, then I will send and fetch thee from thence. Why should I be deprived also of you both in one day? And Rebekah said to Isaac, I am weary of my life, because of the daughters of Heth. If Jacob take a wife of the daughters of Heth, such as these which are of the daughters of the land, what good shall my life do me? So after reading this very important chapter of the book of Genesis, chapter 27, we go into the explanation of the very well-known commentator Matthew Henry of the Bible, and we start with verses 1 through 5. Here, Matthew Henry says, Here is first Isaac's design to make his will and to declare Esau his heir. The promise of the Messiah and the land of Canaan was a great trust, first committed to Abraham, inclusive and typical of spiritual and eternal blessings. This, by divine direction, he transmitted to Isaac. Isaac, being now old, and not knowing, or not understanding, or not duly considering the divine oracle concerning his two sons, that the elder should serve the younger, resolves to entail all the honor and power that were wrapped up in the promise upon Esau his eldest son. In this he was governed more by natural affection and the common method of settlements than he ought to have been, if he know, as it is probable he did, the intimations God had given of his mind in this matter. Note, we are very apt to take our measures rather from our own reason than from divine revelation, and thereby often miss our way. We think the wise and learned, the mighty and noble should inherit the promise, but God sees not as man sees. We see this in 1 Samuel 16:6 and 7. Quote, And it came to pass, when they were come, that he looked on Eliab, and said, Surely the Lord's anointed is before him. But the Lord said unto Samuel, Look not on his countenance, or on the height of his stature, because I have refused him. For the Lord seeth not as man seeth, for man looketh on the outward appearance, but the Lord looketh on the heart. Unquote. Second, the directions he gave to Esau, pursuant to this design. He calls him to him in Genesis 27 verse 1. For Esau, though married, had not yet removed, and, though he had greatly grieved his parents by his marriage, yet they had not expelled him, but it seems very pretty well reconciled to him, and made the best of it. Note, parents that are justly offended at their children, yet must not be implacable towards them. Now first he tells him upon what considerations he resolved to do his vow. In Genesis 27 verse 2, quote, I am old, and therefore must die shortly, yet I know not the day of my death, nor when I must die. I will therefore do that at this time which must be done sometime. Unquote. Note first, old people should be reminded by the growing infirmities of age to do quickly, and with all the little might they have, what the hand finds to do. See Joshua chapter 13 verse 1, for example. And second, the consideration of the uncertainty of the time of our departure out of the world, about which God has wisely kept us in the dark, I could really say, should quicken us to do the work of the day in its day. The heart and the house should both be set and kept in order, because at such an hour as we think not, the Son of Man cometh. Because we know not the day of our death, we are concerned to mind the business of life. Second, he bids him to get things ready for the solemnity of executing his last will and testament, by which he designed to make him his heir, in Genesis chapter 27, verse 3 and 4. Esau must go a-hunting, and bring some venison which his father will eat of, and then bless him. In this he designed not so much the refreshment of his own spirits, that he might give the blessing in a lively manner, as it is commonly taken, but rather the receiving of a fresh instance of his son's filial duty and affection to him, before he bestowed his favor upon him. Perhaps Esau, since he had married, had brought his venison to his wives, and seldom to his father, as formerly. We read in Genesis chapter 27, verse 28, quote, "And Isaac loved Esau, because he did eat of his venison, but Rebekah loved Jacob." Unquote. And therefore Isaac, before he would bless him, would have him show this piece of respect to him. Note, it is fit, if the less be blessed of the greater, that the greater should be served and honored by the less, he says, that my soul may bless thee before I die. Note first, prayer is the work of the soul, and not of the lips only, as the soul must be employed in blessing God. We read that in Psalms 103, verse 1, quote, "Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me, bless his holy name." Unquote. So it must be in blessing ourselves and others. The blessing will not come to the heart if it do not come from the heart. The work of life must be done before we die, for it cannot be done afterwards. Ecclesiastes chapter 9, verse 10, quote, "Whatsoever thy hand findeth to do, do it with thy might. For there is no work, no device, nor knowledge, nor wisdom in the grave whither thou goest." Unquote. And it is very desirable, when we come to die, to have nothing else to do but to die. Isaac lived above 40 years after this. Let none therefore think that they shall die the sooner for making their wills and getting ready for death. Now we go into verses 6 through 17. Rebekah is here contriving to procure for Jacob the blessing which was designed for Esau, and here first. The end was good, for she was directed in this intention by the oracle of God, by which she had been governed in dispensing her affections. God had said it should be so, that the elder should serve the younger, and therefore Rebekah resolves it shall be so, and cannot bear to see her husband designing to thwart the oracle of God. But second, the means were bad and no way justifiable. If it was not a wrong to Esau to deprive him of the blessing, he himself having forfeited it by selling the birthright, as we read in Genesis 25:34, quote, "Then Jacob gave Esau bread and pottage of lentils, and he did eat and drink, and rose up and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright." Unquote. Yet it was a wrong to Isaac, taking advantage of his infirmity, to impose upon him. It was a wrong to Jacob too, whom she thought to deceive, by putting a lie into his mouth, or at least by putting one into his right hand. It would likewise expose him to endless scruples about the blessing, and if he should obtain it thus fraudulently, whether it would stand him or his in any stead, especially if his father should revoke it upon the discovery of the cheat and plead, as he might, that it was nulled by an error personae, a mistake of the person, that is. He himself also was aware of the danger, lest, in Genesis 27, verse 12, if he should miss the blessing, as he might probably have done, he should bring upon himself his father's curse, which he dreaded above anything. Besides, he laid himself open to that divine curse, which is pronounced upon him that causes the blind to wander out of the way. We read this in Deuteronomium chapter 27 verse 18, quote, "Cursed be he that removeth his neighbor's landmark," and all the people shall say, Amen. Unquote. Now, if Rebekah, when she heard Isaac promise the blessing to Esau, had gone at his return from hunting to Isaac, and with humility and seriousness put him in remembrance of that which God had said concerning their sons, if she further had shown him how Esau had forfeited the blessing both by selling his birthright and by marrying strange wives, it is probable that Isaac would have been prevailed upon knowingly and wittingly to confer the blessing upon Jacob, and needed not thus to have been cheated into it. This would have been honorable and laudable, and would have looked well in the history. But God left her to herself, to take this indirect course, that he might have the glory of bringing good out of evil, and of serving his own purposes by the sins and follies of men, and that we might have the satisfaction of knowing that, though there is so much wickedness and deceit in the world, God governs it according to his will. Yeah? Little remark of myself. God governs the world according to his will, so there is no free will of man. So, let's repeat this last part of the sentence. And that we might have the satisfaction of knowing that, though there is so much wickedness and deceit in the world, God governs it according to his will, to his own praise. And we can see that in Job chapter 12 verse 16, where we read, quote, "With him are strength and wisdom, the deceived and the deceiver are his." Unquote. Now Isaac had lost the sense of seeing, which, in this case, could not have been imposed upon, Providence having so admirably well ordered the difference of features that no two faces are exactly alike. Conversation and commerce could scarcely be maintained if there were not such a variety. Therefore she endeavors to deceive, first, his sense of tasting, by dressing some choice pieces of kid, seasoning them, serving them up, so as to make him believe they were venison. This it was no hard matter to do. See the folly of those that are nice and curious in their appetite, and take a pride in humouring it. It is easy to impose upon them with that which they pretended to despise and dislike, so little perhaps does it differ from that to which they give a decided preference. Solomon, many people refer to him as the wisest king that has ever lived, tells us that dainties are deceitful meat, for it is possible for us to be deceived by them in more ways than one. We read that in Proverbs 23:32, quote, "At the last it biteth like a serpent, and stingeth like an adder." Unquote. The second, his sense of feeling and smelling. She put Esau's clothes upon Jacob, his best clothes, which, it might be supposed, Esau would put on in token of joy and respect to his father, when he was to receive the blessing. Isaac knew these by the stuff, shape, and smell to be Esau's. If we would obtain a blessing from our Heavenly Father, we must come for it in the garments of our elder brother, clothed with righteousness, who is the firstborn among many brethren. Yeah? Speaking of Jesus Christ, I hope you understand this, right? When we must come before our Father, we must come in the garments of our elder brother, which is Jesus Christ. We must be clothed with righteousness of him who is the firstborn upon many, many brethren. Lest the smoothness and softness of Jacob's hands and neck should betray him, Rebekah covered them, and probably part of his face, with the skins of the kids that were newly killed. We read in verse 16. Esau was rough indeed, when nothing less than these would serve to make Jacob like him. Those that affect to seem rough and rugged in their carriage put the beast upon the man and really shame themselves by thus disguising themselves. And lastly, it was a very rash word which Rebekah spoke, when Jacob objected the danger of a curse. Upon me be thy curse, my son, she says in verse 13. Christ indeed, who is mighty to save, because mighty to bear, has said, Upon me be the curse. Only obey my voice. He has borne the burden of a curse, the curse of the law, for all those that will take upon them the yoke of the command of the gospel. But it is too daring for any creature to say, Upon me be the curse, unless it be that curse causeless, which we are sure shall not come. As Proverbs 26:2 tells us, quote, As the bird by wandering, as the swallow by flying, so the curse causeless shall not come. Unquote. Now we go into verses 18 through 29. Observe here first the art and assurance with which Jacob managed this intrigue. Yeah, you can also speak of a conspiracy, right? Who would have thought that this plain man could have played his part so well in the design of his nature? His mother having put him in the way of it and encouraged him in it, he dexterously applied himself to those methods which he had never accustomed himself to, but had always conceived an abhorrence of. Note, lying is soon learned. The psalmist speaks of those who, as soon as they are born, speak lies in Psalm 58, verse 3, quote, The wicked are estranged from the womb. They go astray as soon as they be born, speaking lies. And Jeremiah 9:5, quote, And they will deceive every one his neighbor, and will not speak the truth. They have taught their tongue to speak lies, and weary themselves to commit iniquity. Unquote. I wonder how honest Jacob could so readily turn his tongue to say in verse 19, I am Esau, thy firstborn. Nor do I see how the endeavor of some to bring him off with that equivocation, I am made thy firstborn, namely by purchase, does him any service. For when his father asked him in verse 24, Art thou my very son Esau? He said, I am. How could he say, I have done as thou badest me, when he had received no command from his father, but was doing as his mother bade him? How could he say, Eat of my venison, when he knew it came not from the field, but from the fold? But especially, I wonder how we could have the assurance to father it upon God, and to use his name in the cheat in verse 20 when he says, quote, The Lord thy God brought it to me, unquote. Is this Jacob? Is this Israel indeed without guile? It is certainly written, not for our imitation, but for our admonition. Let him that thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. Good men have sometimes failed in the exercise of those graces for which they have been most eminent. Second, the success of this management. Jacob with some difficulty gained his point and obtained the blessing. Now Isaac was at first dissatisfied and would have discovered the fraud if he could have trusted his own ears, for the voice was Jacob's voice, he says in verse 22. Now Providence has ordered a strange variety of voices as well as faces, which is also of use to prevent our being imposed upon. And the voice is a thing not easily disguised nor counterfeited. This may be alluded to illustrate the character of a hypocrite. His voice is Jacob's voice, but his hands are Esau's. He speaks the language of a saint, but he does the work of a sinner. But the judgment will be, as here, by the hands. At length he yielded to the power of the cheat, because the hands were hairy, in verse 23, not considering how easy it was to counterfeit that circumstance. And now Jacob carries it on dexterously, sets his venison before his father, and waits at table very officiously till dinner is done, and the blessing comes to be pronounced in the close of this solemn feast. That which in some small degree extenuates the crime of Rebekah and Jacob is, that the fraud was intended, not so much to hasten the fulfilling, as to prevent the thwarting of the oracle of God. The blessing was just going to be put upon the wrong head, and they thought it was time to bestir themselves. Now let us see how Isaac gave Jacob his blessing in verse 26 through 29. He embraced him in token of a particular affection to him. Those that are blessed of God are kissed with the kisses of his mouth, and they do, by love and loyalty, kiss the Son. As we read in Psalms 2:12, quote, "Kiss the Son, lest he be angry, and ye perish from the way, when his wrath is kindled but a little. Blessed are all they that put their trust in him." Unquote. Secondly, he praised him. He smelled the smell of his raiment, and said, "See, the smell of my son is as the smell of the field which the Lord hath blessed, that is, like that of the most fragrant flowers and spices." It appeared that God had blessed him, and therefore Isaac would bless him. Third, he prayed for him, and therein prophesied concerning him. It is the duty of parents to pray for their children, and to bless them in the name of the Lord, and thus, as well as by their baptism, to do what they can to preserve and perpetuate the entail of the covenant in their families. But this was an extraordinary blessing, and Providence so ordered it that Isaac should bestow it upon Jacob ignorantly and by mistake, that it might appear he was beholden to God for it, and not to Isaac. Three things Jacob here is blessed with. First, plenty in verse 28, heaven and earth concurring to make him rich. And secondly, power in verse 29, particularly dominion over his brethren, namely Esau and his posterity. And third, prevalency with God, and a great interest in heaven. Quote, "Cursed by everyone that curseth thee, and blessed be he that blesseth thee. Let God be a friend to all thy friends, and an enemy to all thy enemies." More is certainly comprised in this blessing than appears prima facie, means at first sight. It must amount to an entail of the promise of the Messiah, and of the Church. This was, in the patriarchal dialect, the blessing. Something spiritual doubtless is included in it. First, that from him should come the Messiah, who should have a sovereign dominion on earth. It was that top branch of his family which people should serve and nations bow down to. See Numbers 24:19, quote, "Out of Jacob shall come he that shall have dominion, and shall destroy him that remaineth of the city." Unquote. Out of Jacob shall come he that shall have dominion. In verse 17 it says Jacob's dominion over Esau was to be only typical of this. In Genesis chapter 49 verse 10, quote, "The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh come, and unto him shall the gathering of the people be." Now this is a very, very important part, Genesis 49 verse 10. The scepter shall not depart from Judah. nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh come. So there is an end, when the scepter shall be parting from Judah, right? When Shiloh comes. And this, of course, speaks of Jesus Christ. This, of course, speaks of the first coming of Jesus Christ. And this is a direct reference to Daniel chapter 9, verse 24 through 27. 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and thy holy city, and so on, to rebuild it for Messiah the Prince, when Shiloh comes. So here in Genesis 49:10, we already hear, not for the first time, but another time, of course, of the coming of Jesus Christ. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh come. And unto him shall the gathering of the people be. Now Matthew Henry continues and says, secondly, that from him should come the church, from Shiloh, from Jesus Christ, which should be particularly owned and favored by heaven. It was part of the blessing of Abraham when he was first called to be the father of the faithful. Genesis chapter 12, verse 3, quote, and I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee, and in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. Unquote. I will bless those that bless thee. Therefore, when Isaac afterwards confirmed the blessing to Jacob, he called it the blessing of Abraham. Genesis chapter 28, verse 4, where it reads, quote, and give thee the blessing of Abraham, to thee, and to thy seed with thee, that thou mayest inherit the land wherein thou art a stranger, which God gave unto Abraham. Unquote. Balaam explains this too in Numbers 24:9, where he says, quote, he couched, he lay down as a lion, and as a great lion. Who shall stir him up? Blessed is he that blesseth thee, and cursed is he that curseth thee. Unquote. Note, it is the best and most desirable blessing to stand in relation to Christ and his church, and to be interested in Christ's power and the church's favors. Now we go into verses 30 through 40. Now here is first the covenant blessing denied to Esau. He that made so light over the birthright would now have inherited the blessing, but he was rejected and found no place of repentance in his father, though he sought it carefully with tears. As we also read in Hebrews chapter 12, verses 16 and 17, where it reads, quote, lest there be any fornicator or profane person, as Esau, who for one morsel of meat sold his birthright. For ye know how that afterward, when he would have inherited the blessing, he was rejected. For he found no place of repentance, though he sought it carefully with tears. Unquote. Observe first how carefully he sought it. He prepared the savory meat as his father had directed him, and then begged the blessing which his father had encouraged him to expect in verse 31. When he understood that Jacob had obtained his when he understood that Jacob had obtained it surreptitiously, he cried with a great and exceedingly bitter cry in verse 34. No man could have laid the disappointment more to heart than he did. He made his father's tent to ring with his grief, and again in verse 38 lifted up his voice and wept. Note, the day is coming when those that now make light of the blessings of the covenant and sell their title to them for a thing of naught will in vain be importunate for them. Those that will not so much as ask and seek now will knock shortly and cry, Lord, Lord. Slighters of Christ will then be humble suitors to him. Second, how he was rejected. Isaac, when first made sensible to the imposition that had been practiced on him, trembled exceedingly in verse 33. Those that follow the choice of their own affections rather than the dictates of the divine will involve themselves in such perplexities as these. But he soon recovers himself. Recovers himself and ratifies the blessing he had given to Jacob. I have blessed him, and he shall be blessed. He might, upon very plausible grounds, have recalled it, but now, at last, he is sensible that he was in an error when he designed it for Esau. Either himself recollecting the divine oracle, or rather having found himself more than ordinarily filled with the Holy Ghost when he gave the blessing to Jacob, he perceived that God did, as it were, say amen to it. Now, first, Jacob was hereby confirmed in his possession of the blessing, and abundantly satisfied of the validity of it, though he obtained it fraudulently. Hence, too, he had reason to hope that God graciously overlooked and pardoned his misconduct. Second, Isaac hereby acquiesced in the will of God, though it contradicted his own expectations and affection. He had a mind to give Esau the blessing, but when he perceived the will of God was otherwise, he submitted, and this he did by faith. Hebrews 11:20 confirms this when it says, quote, by faith Jacob, when he was dying, blessed both of the sons of Joseph, and worshipped, leaning upon the top of his staff, unquote, as Abraham before him when he had solicited for Ishmael. May not God do what he will with his own? Now Esau hereby was cut off from the expectation of that special blessing which he thought to have preserved to himself when he sold his birthright. We, by this instance, are taught, first, that it is not of him that willeth, nor of him that runneth, but of God that showeth mercy. Romans chapter 9, verse 16. The apostle seems to allude to this story. Esau had a good will to the blessing and ran for it. But God that showed mercy designed it for Jacob, that the purpose of God according to the election might stand, as we read in Romans 9:11, quote, for the children being not yet born, neither having done any good or evil, that the purpose of God according to election might stand, not of works, but of him that calleth, unquote. The Jews, like Esau, hunted after the law of righteousness, Romans 9:31, quote, but Israel, which followed after the law of righteousness, has not attained to the law of righteousness, unquote, yet missed of the blessing of righteousness, because they sought it by the works of the law, Romans 9:32, quote, wherefore? Because they sought it not by faith, but as it were by the works of the law. For they stumbled at that stumbling stone, unquote, while the Gentiles who, like Jacob, sought it by faith in the oracle of God, obtained it by force with that violence which the kingdom of heaven suffers. We read in Matthew 11:12, quote, and from the days of John the Baptist until now, the kingdom of heaven suffereth violence, and the violent take it by force, unquote. Now, second, that those who undervalue their spiritual birthright and can afford to sell it for a morsel of meat, forfeit spiritual blessings, and it is just with God to deny them those favors they were careless of. Those that will part in their wisdom and grace, with their faith and a good conscience for the honors, wealth, or pleasures of this world, however they may pretend a zeal for the blessing, have already judged themselves unworthy of it, and so shall their doom be. Third, that those who lift up hands in wrath lift them up in vain. Esau, instead of repenting of his own folly, reproached his brother unjustly, charged him with taking away the birthright which he had fairly sold him in Genesis 27 verse 36, and conceived malice against him for what he had now done in Genesis 27 verse 41. Those are not likely to speed in prayer who turn those resentments upon their brethren which they should turn upon themselves, and lay the blame of their miscarriages upon others when they should take shame to themselves. That those who seek not till it is too late will be rejected. That those who seek not till it is too late will be rejected. Yeah, I know, I repeat that sentence, it's a very important one. Those who seek not till it is too late will be rejected. This was the ruin of Esau. He did not come in time. As there is an accepted time, a time when God will be found, so there is a time when he will not answer those that call upon him, because they neglected the appointed season. As we read in Proverbs 1:28, quote, "Then shall they call upon me, but I will not answer. They shall seek me early, but they shall not find me." Unquote. The time of God's patience and our probation will not last always. The day of grace will come to an end, and the door will be shut. Then many that now despise the blessing will seek it carefully, for then they will know how to value it, and will see themselves undone, forever undone, without it, but to no purpose. We read this in Luke chapter 13, verses 25 through 27. Quote, "When once the master of the house is risen up, and has shut to the door, and ye begin to stand without, and to knock at the door, saying, Lord, Lord, open unto us, and he shall answer and say unto you, I know you not whence ye are. Then shall ye begin to say, We have eaten and drunk in thy presence, and thou hast taught in our streets. But he shall say, I tell you, I know you not whence ye are. Depart from me, all ye workers of iniquity." Unquote. Oh, that we would therefore in this our day know the things that belong to our peace. Second, there is a common blessing bestowed upon Esau. First, this he desired. Bless me also, in verse 34. Hast thou not reserved a blessing for me? Verse 36. Note first, the worst of men know how to wish well to themselves, and even those who profanely sell their birthright seem piously to desire the blessing. Faint desires of happiness without a right choice at the end and a right use of the means deceive many into their own ruin. Multitudes go to hell with their mouths full of good wishes. Or how do they say in this world? The way to hell is paved with good intentions, right? Or here Matthew Henry says, multitudes go to hell with their mouths full of good wishes. I cannot help but think of many, many betrayed Catholics that will walk that path. Multitudes go to hell with their mouths full of good wishes. The desire of the slothful and unbelieving kills them. Many will seek to enter in as Esau, who shall not be able because they do not strive, which you read in Luke 13:24, quote, "Strive to enter in at the strait gate, for many, I say unto you, will seek to enter in and shall not be able." Unquote. Second, it is the folly of most men that they are willing to take up with any good. Psalm 4:6, quote, "There be many that say, Who will show us any good? Lord, lift thou up the light of thy countenance upon us." Unquote. As Esau here, who desired but a second-rate blessing, a blessing separated from the birthright. Profane hearts think any blessing as good as that from God's oracle. Hast thou but one? As if he had said, I will take up with any. Though I have not the blessing of the church, yet let me have some blessing. Second, this he had, and let him make his best of it. In verse 39 and 40. First, it was a good thing, and better than he deserved. It was promised him, first, that he should have a competent livelihood, the fatness of the earth and the dew of heaven. Note, those that come short of the blessings of the covenant may yet have a very good share of outward blessings. God gives good ground and good weather to many that reject his covenant and have no part nor lot in it. Second, that by degrees he should recover his liberty. If Jacob must rule, as we read in Genesis 27 verse 29, Esau must serve. But he has this to comfort him. He shall live by his sword. He shall serve, but he shall not starve. And, at length, after much skirmishing, he shall break the yoke of bondage and wear marks of freedom. This was fulfilled, as we read in 2 Kings 8:20 and 8:22, when the Edomites revolted. Quote, "In his days Edom revolted from under the hand of Judah and made a king over themselves. Yet Edom revolted from under the hand of Judah unto this day. Then Libnah revolted at the same time." Unquote. Yet it was far short of Jacob's blessing. For him, God had reserved some better thing. First, in Jacob's blessing, the dew of heaven is put first, as that which is the most valued and desired and depended upon. In Esau's, the fatness of the earth is put first, for it was this that he had the first and principal regard to. Second, Esau has these, but Jacob has them from God's hand. God give thee the dew of heaven, as we read in verse 28. It was enough to Esau to have the possession, but Jacob desired it by promise and to have it from covenant love. Jacob shall have dominion over his brethren. Hence, the Israelites often ruled over the Edomites. Esau shall have dominion, that is, he shall gain some power and interest, but shall never have dominion over his brother. We never find that the Jews were sold into the hands of the Edomites, or that they oppressed them. But the great difference in that there is nothing in Esau's blessing that points at Christ, nothing that brings him or his into the church and covenant of God. Without the fatness of the earth and the plunder of the field will stand him in little stead. Thus Isaac by faith blessed them both according as their lot should be, or faith. Some observe that Jacob was blessed with a kiss, so was not Esau. And the last 5 verses, 41 through 46. Matthew Henry continues, "Here is first the malice Esau bore to Jacob upon account of the blessing which he had obtained," in verse 41. "Thus he went in the way of Cain, who slew his brother because he had gained the acceptance with God of which he had rendered himself unworthy. Esau's hatred of Jacob was first a causeless hatred. He hated him for no other reason but because his father blessed him and God loved him." Note, the happiness of saints is the envy of sinners. The happiness of saints is the envy of sinners. Whom heaven blesses, hell curses. Second, it was a cruel hatred. Nothing less would satisfy him than to slay his brother. It is the blood of the saints that persecutors thirst after. I will slay my brother. How could he say that word without horror? How could he call him brother and yet vow his death? Note, the rage of persecutors will not be tied up by any bonds, no, not the strongest and most sacred. Third, it was a politic hatred. He expected his father would soon die, and then titles must be tried and interests and contested between the brothers, which would give him a fair opportunity for revenge. He thinks it not enough to live by his sword himself, in verse 40, unless his brother die by it. He is loth to grieve his father while he lives, and therefore puts off the intended murder till his death, not caring how much he then grieved his surviving mother. Note first, those are bad children to whom their good parents are a burden, and who, upon any account, long for the days of mourning for them. Second, bad men are long held in by external restraints from doing the mischief they would do, and so their wicked purposes come to naught. And third, those who think to defeat God's purposes will undoubtedly be disappointed themselves. Esau aimed to prevent Jacob or his seed from having the dominion by taking away his life before he was married. But who can disannul what God has spoken? Men may fret at God's counsels, but cannot change them. Second, the method Rebekah took to prevent the mischief. First, she gave Jacob warning of his danger, and advised him to withdraw for a while and shift for his own safety. She tells him what she heard of Esau's design, that he comforted himself with the hope of an opportunity to kill his brother in verse 42. Would one think that such a bloody barbarous thought as this could be a comfort to a man? If Esau could have kept his design to himself, his mother would not have suspected it. But men's impudence in sin is often their infatuation, and they cannot accomplish their wickedness because their rage is too violent to be concealed, and a bird of the air carries the voice. Observe here first what Rebekah feared, lest she should be deprived of them both in one day in verse 45, deprived not only of the murdered, but of the murderer, who either by the magistrate or by the immediate hand of God would be sacrificed to justice, which she herself must acquiesce in and not obstruct, or, if not so, yet thenceforward she would be deprived of all joy and comfort in him. Those that are lost to virtue are in a manner lost to all their friends. With what pleasure can a child be looked upon that can be looked upon as no other than a child of the devil? Second, what Rebekah hoped, that if Jacob for a while kept out of sight, the affront which his brother resented so fiercely would by degrees go out of mind. The strength of passions is weakened and taken off by the distance both of time and place. She promised herself that his brother's anger would turn away. Note, yielding pacifies great offenses. And even those that have a good cause and God on their side must yet use this with other prudent expedients for their own preservation. Now, second, she impressed Isaac with an apprehension of the necessity of Jacob's going among her relations upon another account, which was to take a wife in verse 46. She would not tell him of Esau's wicked design against the life of Jacob, lest it should trouble him, but prudently took another way to gain her point. Isaac saw as uneasy as he was to Esau's being unequally yoked with Hittites, and therefore, with a very good color of reason, she moves to have Jacob married to one that was better principled. Note, one miscarriage should serve as a warning to prevent another. Those are careless indeed that stumble twice at the same stone. Yet Rebekah seems to have expressed herself somewhat too warmly in the matter, when she said, "What good will my life do me if Jacob marry a Canaanite?" Thanks be to God, all our comfort is not lodged in one hand. We may do the work of life and enjoy the comforts of life, though everything do not fall out to our mind, and though our relations be not in all respects agreeable to us. Perhaps Rebekah spoke with this concern because she saw it necessary for the quickening of Isaac to give speedy orders in this matter. Observe, though Jacob was himself very taughty and well fixed in his religion, yet he had need to be put out of the way of temptation. I'm sorry, I just skipped a line here. Even he was in danger both of following the bad example of his brother and of being drawn into a snare by it. We must not presume too far upon the wisdom and resolution, no, not of those children that are most hopeful and promising, but care must be taken to keep them out of harm's way. Now this important explanation leads us up to the next part, Genesis chapter 32, and the change from Jacob to Israel, how and why. Because the book deals, of course, with that subject, because it is named Wrestling with an Angel, this chapter 1. So we will just go a little bit into the end of Genesis chapter 27, what the author has to say here. When Isaac was old and his eyes were dim so that he could not see, he decided to bless Esau, his firstborn, before he died. We read this in Genesis chapter 27, verse 1 through 4. I will not repeat them now because we read the whole chapter already in the beginning. But first he sent Esau out to the field to hunt for a tasty meal. Isaac's wife, Rebekah, had other plans. Realizing the importance of her husband's final blessing upon the firstborn, she coveted what blessing for her younger son Jacob, who was more spiritual than Esau. While Esau was hunting in the field, Rebekah quickly prepared a meal and convinced Jacob to take the food to Isaac while pretending it to be Esau, as we read in verses 5 through 17. When Jacob took the meal to his father, he lied, saying, "I am Esau, thy firstborn. I have done according as thou badest me. Arise, I pray thee, sit and eat of my venison, that thy soul may bless me." Unquote in verse 19. When Isaac inquired how it was that he had killed an animal so quickly, Jacob lied again, saying, "Because the Lord thy God brought it to me." Verse 20. Still suspiciously, Isaac asked, "Art thou my very son Esau?" Jacob then lied a third time, saying, "I am," in verse 24. And what I personally remarked at this part is Jacob lies 3 times, and Peter denied Jesus Christ 3 times. I think there must be a connection. Maybe you have an idea what that means, but I think those are very important little incidents in the Bible that here and there we may put a link into it. Jacob lies 3 times to his father, and Peter denies 3 times Jesus Christ before men, before the cock crows. Right? Isaac finally believed this deception and gave the firstborn's blessing to Jacob. Soon afterward, Esau returned from his hunting trip, and then Isaac realized that he had been tricked. He said to Esau, Thy brother came with subtlety and has taken away thy blessing, in verse 35. Then Esau hated Jacob and said in his heart, I will slay my brother Jacob, in verse 41. However, Rebekah discovered Esau's plot and sent Jacob away for her relatives in a far country, where he remained for 20 years, which we read in verse 43 and in Genesis 31, verse 41. Jacob actually never saw his mother again. And then we go into Genesis chapter 32, but that of course will be for the next reading. I hope that you followed me in the reading not only of chapter Genesis 27 of Genesis, but most and for all, for the most part of this reading today, which was not of the book Exploding the Israel Deception, but of the reading of the commentary of Matthew Henry, to get a deeper understanding of the situation that developed there between Jacob and Esau. And we have to understand that Jacob had a different character in the beginning of his life than later on, because this is what we are going to learn when we turn into chapter 32 of Genesis. Now, the point why I'm doing the study and why I did the reading of Matthew Henry's comment in the King James Bible is because we need a very profound understanding of the situation as there was. Even though that Jacob lied, he was still fulfilling God's will. And we should never forget that. Because whatever we do, we are led by God. And we do His bidding. Especially in terms like these. God had a goal. He had a point that he needed to go to. He had a point for Jacob to go to. He had a point for Esau to go to. Normally, all throughout the Bible, we know that the firstborn is blessed above the secondborn. But here with Esau and Jacob, we already know that Jacob held the ankle of Esau when he was born first. And there's a reason why God says that the firstborn must, in this case, serve the secondborn. There's a reason why God preferred Jacob over Esau. And the reason is that Jacob was more spiritual, as Esau was more in the flesh. And the biggest proof of that is that he sold his birthright for a pot of lentils. Anyway, I think it was a quite interesting but also an intensive little study with understanding everything that Matthew Henry gave us here in the Esau commentary of the King James Bible of Genesis chapter 27. But I think that you understood the importance of reading this chapter 27, and next time we go into chapter 32, which is at least as important, if not even more important, to understand not only the character of Jacob, but also to understand why God changed the character of Jacob. And that's what it's all about. And when you understand that Jacob's character has been changed, you understand why Jacob became Israel. And you understand that there is a difference between a fleshly and a spiritual Israel. And we will go into that in the next understanding of chapter 32 of Genesis, which we will first read and then understand with the explanation of Matthew Henry's commentary. For today, I thank you for watching and listening, and hope to see you back in our next study of Genesis chapter 32 under the guise of the book Exploding the Israel Deception. Until next time, please read your Bible. Maranatha.